We're gonna go into low load training and even muscle damage, and if that is necessary for you to get as swole as possible, and we're gonna start right now. All right, so in May of 2023, I'm checking out this physiological responses and adaptations to lower load resistance training. And what are those implications for health and performance, okay? So this came out in May of 2023. And of course, one of the all-time great researchers, Brad Schoenfeld, is behind this paper. And what they cover right off the bat is that resistance training, so think about this. This is the easiest definition of resistance training. So resistance training, this is a training method that we can use to enhance strength, gait speed, so how quickly are we running, our mobility, and our health. Okay, so that's a really, really simple way to look at it. So we can get faster from resistance-based training, we will get stronger, we will improve our health, and we will improve our mobility through resistance-based training. So this is some key aspects. Now, what we're so used to in this paper is that they start to break down, okay, external load. We're used to seeing weightlifters, powerlifters, bodybuilders even, lifting super, super heavy weights. Maybe not as much the bodybuilders, but powerlifters, weightlifters. We know, football players, big time hulking individuals, we typically will see them lifting very large loads. In here, the external load required to induce benefits can be a contentious issue. So people will say, like, if you're under 80%, it doesn't even count. And I remember our strength coach in college saying, well, the Bulgarians don't even count sets under 80%, so we shouldn't do that. Really? Okay. So what ends up happening is that Schoenfeld and his crew, Jonathan Weekly, Johanna Jonberg, they're looking at this and they say, okay, there's a growing body of evidence that suggests that when lower load resistance training, less than 50% of the 1 rep max, is completed within close proximity to concentric failure. So think about this. Let's say your bench press is 400 pounds. And we take 190 pounds, so less than 50% over a 1 rep max, and we get close to proximity of concentric failure. So this would be the concentric portion of that bench press. When we get close to that proximity, I lock it out. If we get close to that proximity, it can serve as an effective alternative to traditional higher loads above 70%. So training, and in many cases, can promote similar or even superior physiological adaptations. So even superior physiological adaptations. So such findings are important given that confidence with external loads and access to training facilities and equipment are commonly cited barriers. I think that's a great aspect. And we're gonna go into this a little bit further, is that oftentimes when you're traveling, or even if you are, let's say you're in a situation where you don't have access to a large amount of weight, a lot of people might say, like, well, I don't think I can get stronger. I don't think I can improve my strength. Well, I don't think I can do this because I don't have access to a weight room. And what I'm thinking about here specifically is people who are strength training or resistance training for health, and people who are traveling that are elite athletes. Okay, so if we're traveling and we are a soccer player or a football player, and maybe we have 2 extra days that we could train, what this is showing us is that there's potential that if we're using less than our 50% max, we can still reap some resistance-based training benefits, and in some cases, superior. So there's a review of some of the mechanisms and physiological changes, and we have to consider the evidence for applying lower loads for those at risk of cardiovascular and metabolic diseases. So think about somebody who has issues with diabetes, or even if somebody lacks specific levels of mobility. An example might be someone who's just getting into resistance-based training, someone who's a little bit more untrained and they're overweight, they're obese, just doing body weight squats are probably gonna be within 50% of their maximal load, their 1 rep max, and that will in turn help their mobility and help their health. So finally, we provide practical recommendations. Okay, so using lower loads 2 to 3 times per week with 3 to 4 sets and loads no lower than 30% of a 1 rep max can enhance muscular hypertrophy and strength adaptations. So strength adaptations typically we'll see will come from mechanical tension, neural improvement, neural coordination, metabolic stress, and then also from muscular damage. Consequently, implementing lower load training can be a beneficial and viable resistance training method. So some of these key points, let's break this down a little bit more tangibly. So if we say lower load training, let's use this scenario. I want to come into the gym, I'm injured. I don't know what I can do. Well, if I lift heavy, I hurt my back, or I hurt my knee, or I hurt my shoulder. But using the case of the 400-pound bench press individual, it doesn't hurt when I bench press 185 pounds. All right, well, let's do 3 to 4 sets based off of what this paper is saying, at 185 pounds, which is now less than 50%, don't get down to 30%, stay above that marker. Get to within proximity of concentric failure for 3 to 4 sets. So let's say you do 4 sets of 17 at 185, at 185 pounds, and you do that twice a week, you will see some type of hypertrophic gains. Now, the length of that could be discussed further, but it should enable you to still maintain or increase muscle mass while still getting that work done. So then as you're healing, and let's say you're doing some specific mobility work, or let's say you're doing some specific rehab work, you can maintain or potentially increase your strength while improving that movement pattern, which then alleviates the stress of that area, or the impingement of, in this case, your shoulder. Now, despite hesitancy and skepticism over the practicality of lifting with lower loads for muscle hypertrophy, there's substantial evidence that supports this implementation. Considering the somewhat discordant cellular signaling differences between lifting with lower and higher loads, the practical significance of these findings still need to be elucidated. So that's another thing where it's like, if I'm looking at weightlifter and they have to lift heavy based off their sport is how much weight can you put on the bar. We have to figure out in future science or future research and future data, okay, what does that 50% look like for the weightlifter? What does that 50% look like for the actual power lifter? And is there sort of this period like, okay, for if the individual's injured, 2 to 4 weeks will suffice, but ideally they would be healthy within 2 to 4 weeks so that we can come back and start using some higher loads. So that does need to be clarified. Now, to maximize the benefits of lower load resistance training, we have to have high levels of effort, and training in close proximity to concentric failure is required. A lot of people will say, well, you don't need to fail. And this isn't saying you have to fail, but you gotta be able to get to that point. And I even would argue here is that this key concept, this key point is that younger kids can get stronger with less than 50% intensity. Okay, that's fact, right? Like, maybe not fact, but based off of this paper, it's saying essentially that. One thing I'll say anecdotally is that a lot of kids, for the first 4 to 6 to 8 weeks of their training, they're just learning how to get comfortable with that feeling of getting close to concentric failure. It's really uncomfortable to feel the burn in your pecs, your shoulders, your back, your legs. It's really, really hard to feel that. And some of the things is that the first 4 weeks that when you're training a younger athlete, you just train them the movement pattern. The next 4 weeks, you can really start to use this concept here of training below 50% load and just push them to get comfortable with that feeling. Then you increase a little bit of their load slightly, and then you'd have another phase where you come back and you say, all right, we're gonna go back to 40% maximum, okay? And you sort of have a way to figure out, okay, this could in theory be their potential 1 rep max. You don't wanna test them if they're 12 years old, but it's a really unique way to try and get people to be like tougher. It's hard training, but we also know it's safer and it will lead to strength and hypertrophic gains. I did want to point out here again, furthermore, it could be recommended that it's implemented 2 to 3 times per week, 3 to 4 sets per exercise, but don't go less than 30% of your 1 RM. Lower load resistance training can be used in conjunction with higher loads and should be a personal choice based on individual goals. That may help reduce participation barriers and promote exercise adherence. So in some cases, if you have a marathon runner, right, they might do very well with this less than 50% of 1 rep max. And if they go up to 85 or 90% of their 1 rep max back squat, they might not want to keep lifting. They might stop resistance-based training because they're going, what am I doing? I'm a marathon runner. Why am I back squatting my 1 rep max, for 3 doubles or 90% of my 1 rep max for 3 doubles? I would rather do 3 sets at 12, getting close to failure at 40% of my 1 rep max. So you can start to see where certain specific sports will carry over. And I think that oftentimes in the past, coaches don't like that concept. They sort of fear that ability, right? They sort of fear, well, we got to get them as strong as possible. And one cool thing here is that even inside of this paper, Schoenfeld and his group, they even start to show you, okay, what happens with higher load versus lower load? What's that adaptation look like? What's protein synthesis look like? How are satellite cells being proliferated to try and heal things, heal areas, and in turn lead to that strength and lead to that muscular hypertrophy growth? And so I think that this paper, the overarching theme here is that we can take lower load training and confidently say that we can use this at various points. If somebody's injured, if somebody's obese, if someone struggles to adhere to their strength training because of their mental goals, or if we have a new athlete who's coming in the door, a younger athlete, These are methods that we can use very, very successfully to continuously help develop their gait speed, improve their strength, improve even their cardiovascular health and their mobility. Don't shy away from those light loads. And oftentimes inside of our app, Peak Strength, we'll have 3 sets of 25, 3 sets of 17, and we have that programmed in to be under your 50% max. Some things that people might criticize us for on YouTube is why 3 sets of 17? Why 3 sets of 25? Because based off of what this paper is saying and other data, this is a very effective rep range. And if we're training heavier with sports like weightlifting or football or wrestling or combat sports or lacrosse, field hockey, whatever, if we're training heavier inside of Peak Strength and we want to push a double power clean or a triple back squat to increase a vertical jump, or if we're doing that on athlete day, we can also backdoor that work with some structural bodybuilding exercises to try and solidify the strength in the lower back or around the knees or around the ankles or around your shoulders. So you can use this concept of lower load training in those specific problem areas based off of your sport, and that's exactly what we do in Peak Strength. So head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store, the Apple iOS Store. You can download Peak Strength today. We're gonna give you 5 free workouts. You're gonna get a chance to have a taste of this low load training, because remember, freaks, if you wanna become a champion, you've always gotta cultivate your power. Peace.